The first bark didn't echo. It landed like a punch. Connor Hayes paused on the threshold of the old stone mansion, the brass key still in his hand, Max frozen by his side. The dog's body had stiffened, weight on his back legs, ears locked forward, low growl rising from his throat. Connor glanced down. Easy, boy. It's just dust and bad memories. But Max didn't move. It was a house that shouldn't have mattered. A foreclosure dump. Built in the 70s, abandoned in the 90s, left to rot until the county listed it at a token price to get it off their books. 50 cents. That's all it took. No one else even raised a paddle at the auction. People thought Connor was a joke, or worse, a broken soldier with nowhere else to go. Let them think it. He pushed the door open. It groaned with tired hinges, releasing a wave of stale air and cold stone breath. Max hesitated, then finally stepped in, but not without another deep growl, pointed straight towards the stairwell. Connor dropped his duffel in the foyer. The walls were thick limestone, uneven but solid. A wide staircase curled up to the left, worn banister coated in a decade of silence. He swept his flashlight across the floor. Dust swirled, but underneath, faint scuff marks caught the light. Too fresh. Someone's been here. Connor muttered. Max was already moving, nose to the ground, body tense like a drawn bow. Connor followed, boots soft on the warped hardwood. The living room was cavernous, with a fireplace made of the same grey stone as the walls. Furniture was gone. The hearth sat cold, but a brass poker leaned neatly in the corner. Not dropped, not rusted, just placed. Intact. The kitchen still had 2000s-era avocado green appliances. The fridge was unplugged, magnet still clinging to its surface. A fish with a crooked smile, and the words, "Gone fishing." The calendar on it read, March 2009. Connor's brow furrowed. The county swore this place had been abandoned since '83. The math didn't add up. But then again, small towns were good at lying. He'd learned that young. By sundown, Connor had unrolled a sleeping bag in front of the fireplace. He fed Max, opened a can of ravioli for himself, and sat in silence. The sound of a place with no intention of being welcoming. Max didn't eat much. His eyes stayed fixed on the top of the stairs. That night, just after midnight, Connor woke to Max standing at full alert. The dog's tail was stiff, ears forward. Then he barked. Once, Connor sat up fast, hand already moving for the flashlight and the pocket pistol in his jacket. Nothing moved. The house groaned once above them. Max stalked toward the hallway, growling low. Connor swept the light along the ceiling. No footsteps, no creaks, just that heavy silence again, oppressive and waiting. He whispered, "What do you hear, Max?" The dog stopped near the eastern wall, pawing gently at the baseboard. Not scratching, not panicked. Intentional, like he was pointing. Connor knelt beside him. The wall was cool, the paint brittle. He tapped twice. It sounded hollow. Behind him, Max gave another bark. Connor leaned his forehead against the wall and sighed. This was supposed to be a reset. A 50-cent joke of a house, a fresh start with the only soul who never asked him to be anything but present. Instead, it already felt like a deployment. He retrieved a crowbar from the truck and returned to the wall. The paint flaked off easily. Beneath was a seam, uneven plaster covering something smoother. He dug at it, flakes catching the beam of the flashlight like snow in a wind tunnel. Max sat behind him, patient but vibrating with awareness. Then Connor heard it, a whisper of air moving behind the wall, a change in temperature. He pressed his ear to the seam. A space. Not just hollow, something bigger. He worked for an hour, shoulders burning, until a square panel shifted inward with a muffled pop. Dust exploded out like the breath of a sleeping thing awakened. Max growled again, short and sharp. Behind the wall was a narrow set of wooden stairs descending into black. Connor stood at the edge and aimed the light down. Wood. Concrete. A smell of paper and steel and something older, like a memory sealed too long. Max didn't wait. The shepherd stepped down the stairs with slow, precise movements. Connor followed. At the bottom, the light revealed rows of metal cabinets. Filing drawers, labeled ordered. A desk in the center with a lamp unplugged but intact. It wasn't a basement. It was an archive. Connor opened a drawer. Land deeds, military contracts, check stubs, signatures, receipts. Some typed, others written in the same hand over and over. Faded ink, but still legible. Then he found it. A photograph. A younger man in uniform, standing beside a shepherd. Not Max, but close. His breath caught. It was his father. On the back, in faint pencil, were the words, Petition, 1981, Land Seizure Hearing. Connor felt the walls close in. His father had died without answers. Now the silence of the house had just given up its first whisper. Max came to his side and nudged the photo with his nose, gently. Then he looked toward the stairs again, ears twitching. Connor followed the gaze. The sound came again. A footstep upstairs. He turned off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them whole. Max pressed against his leg, silent now, waiting. Connor didn't breathe. Whoever had lived here hadn't left. They'd just been waiting for someone to come back. And Max had known it from the very first bark. The air in the house was never quite still. It didn't howl or creak like the usual old places. Instead, it pressed inward. Quiet, heavy, listening. Connor Hayes rose early, the kind of early burned into him from deployments. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the cold in the house had already crept into his bones. Max was sitting upright at the base of the stairs, perfectly still, ears pivoting like tiny satellites. Connor rubbed his face and stood. "You hear something again?" Max didn't bark. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed locked on the staircase, like he was watching for someone to come down. Connor made coffee in the warped kitchen, the drip machine somehow still functional after God knew how many years. The countertop had a faint smear, like someone had wiped away dust recently. Not all of it, just enough to suggest someone had been here and cared how it looked. He wandered back into the living room, mug in hand, and sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth. Max followed, lying close but alert. His nose twitched toward the far wall to the right of the fireplace. Not the hidden panel they'd found the night before, but somewhere else, higher, more specific. Connor glanced at the hearth. Something felt off. He placed a hand on the stone and dragged it slowly. It was clean, not just aged. Wiped. His gaze rose. The mantel above bore no dust, at all, but the surrounding shelves were coated in a thick, undisturbed layer. Someone had been here. Recently, cleaning only certain surfaces. Why? He knelt to inspect the baseboard. A faint scuff in the wood. Narrow. Fresh. The kind you'd get from military boots. Not hiking ones, not farmer, but rubber-soled tactical. Connor set the mug down and stood. Max rose with him, nose tilted toward the hearth again. "You're telling me someone came back for something?" Connor murmured. Max gave a low whuff. Not a warning. More like agreement. Later that day, Connor walked the perimeter of the house. The yard stretched beyond a crooked fence into an overgrown field, cottonwoods hunched against the cold. He followed Max along the edge of the property. The dog moved with certainty, occasionally pausing to sniff low-hanging branches, then continuing on. At the back of the lot, near an old garden bed now choked with weeds, Max stopped. Connor followed his line of sight. In the soft earth near the side of the house, barely visible in the dry dirt, were footprints. At least 2 sets, One large, wide gate, the other smaller, hesitant, both recent. Connor crouched. The impressions were clean, deep enough to show tread, not washed away by weather. Someone had walked here after the last rain, which had been less than a week ago. He rose slowly. This wasn't a forgotten house. It was a watched one. That night, Connor didn't sleep in the sleeping bag. He sat upright, back against the wall, flashlight on the table, Max curled beside him but not relaxed. The dog's breathing was slow, but his ears twitched every few seconds, locked onto the silence. At 2:03 a.m., Max bolted upright. Then he barked, loud, sharp, straight toward the eastern wall. Connor grabbed the flashlight instantly, sweeping the beam. Nothing moved. Max was already standing at the base of the wall near the old piano. He was stiff, ears flat, tail low but steady. He barked again, louder this time, echoing against the stone. Connor moved to his side, light dancing, along the wood paneling. "What is it?" Max pawed the floor once, then again. Same spot. Connor pressed his ear to the wall. Nothing. He tapped. Hollow. Max growled, a slow, rising sound that shook in his chest. Then, for the first time, Connor heard it too. Not a noise exactly, but a shift in pressure, like someone holding their breath on the other side. He didn't speak, just reached for the crowbar he'd kept nearby. As he slid the tip into the seam between the wall and the panel, Max shifted his stance, turning slightly toward the hallway behind them. Connor paused. Max let out a short, soft bark. Not toward the wall now, but the stairs. Connor turned his head. No creaking, no footsteps. But the house felt different, as if the person it remembered most had returned. Connor lowered the crowbar. Not yet. He moved back slowly, Max beside him, and sat near the hearth again, eyes fixed on the staircase. His heart beat like a drumline in his chest. The flashlight was still warm in his hand. The house was watching them, and Connor knew one thing now for sure. They weren't the first to come back, and they weren't alone. The next morning brought no peace. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, knowing. Connor sat with his coffee gone cold in his hand, eyes fixed on Max, who was pacing. Not nervous, purposeful. The dog moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, sniffing low near the fireplace, pausing, then circling back to a specific spot at the base of the living room wall, not far from the scorched hearth. His tail was down, his hackles flat, but his eyes stayed locked on a seam in the floor. Connor lowered the mug, stood. "You smell something again?" Max didn't respond. He simply pawed once at the stone tile, then again, harder this time. Claws scraped against the slate, chipping the edge. Connor crouched. The floor looked solid, but Max had keyed in. No hesitation, no playfulness, just instinct. He ran his hand across the seam. Slight temperature difference. Barely there, but the stone here felt cooler. He tapped twice, duller than the surrounding tile. "Okay," he murmured, standing. "Let's find out what you're after." He fetched the crowbar again, jamming the flat end into the seam. The first tile resisted. The second groaned. The third shifted. Beneath it was not foundation, no concrete or insulation. Instead, a wooden trap door, edges worn from time but still intact. Connor looked at Max, who sat now, tail brushing the floor, gaze fixed and unblinking. "You knew." From the second we walked in, he lifted the hatch. A waft of stale air spilled upward, dry but laced with something else. Old paper, ink, molded leather. He aimed his flashlight into the opening. Wooden stairs descended into darkness. No dust, no cobwebs. Someone had used this in the past decade, maybe sooner. Max stepped forward first, placing one paw on the top step. "Wait," Connor said softly. but Max only glanced back long enough for confirmation, then continued. Connor followed. The stairs creaked in that slow, honest way that old wood always did. The walls tightened the deeper they went, stone giving way to dense earth packed with history. At the bottom, the beam of light cut through layers of still air and dust. It wasn't a cellar, it was a vault. Not the kind for treasure, the kind for secrets. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Most were labeled in neat handwriting, dates, surnames, tract numbers. Dozens of cardboard boxes sat stacked in tidy rows, marked with county codes and property IDs. In the center, a desk sat under a dangling bulb, unplugged but intact. Max walked a slow arc through the space, sniffing the cabinets one by one. No growl, just alert focus. He paused at a particular filing drawer and sat. Connor opened it. Land deeds, survey maps, acquisition records. He flipped through pages, each one signed, notarized, filed, and dated. But the names, he recognized some. Old ranch families, a school teacher who disappeared after retirement, a preacher who left town suddenly. Then he found a manila folder near the back. Inside, a photograph slid loose. Connor froze. His father, younger, wearing a county employee badge, hand resting on the back of a German shepherd. The photo was grainy, but his father's eyes were the same, steady, watchful, tired, just like his own had become. Connor turned the photo over. In faded pencil, just 7 words. If I can't stand in court, let my son know the truth. He sat down heavily on the edge of the desk, the photo held gently between his fingers. The breath he took didn't come easy. Max walked over and sat beside him, leaning in just enough that Connor could feel the warmth of him. His father had worked in property records, that much he remembered. But the circumstances of his disappearance had always been vague. A car accident, a closed case, a shrug from the sheriff's office, and a funeral with a sealed casket. Connor had been 17. Now he was sitting on top of a vault that held the paper trail of a crime nobody ever had the courage or ability to speak about. And Max, somehow, had walked him straight to it. He flipped through more pages. Some of the signatures were clearly forged. The names were repetitive, too consistent. Fake buyers, duplicate filings, whole properties reassigned under shell companies. It wasn't just a paper scam, it was a map of theft, coordinated, institutionalized, and hidden beneath stone for decades. Connor exhaled. Dad knew. Max laid down, head on Connor's boot, his breathing slow and measured. A sharp sound cracked through the silence above, like wood settling, or something shifting its weight on old floorboards. Connor froze. He turned off the flashlight, swallowed his breath, and listened. Nothing. But Max's ears tilted back, and the fur along his spine rose. Not barking now. Waiting. Connor waited with him. Whoever had been in this house before them might not be gone. And the truth they'd just uncovered might be exactly what someone was still willing to bury. The attic wasn't on any blueprint Connor had seen. The pull-down ladder had been tucked neatly into the ceiling above the hallway, disguised by a coat of matching paint and the illusion of age. Max was the one who found it. He'd been sniffing along the upstairs corridor, nose close to the trim, when he stopped cold. Ears perked, gaze fixed upward. Connor looked up, then followed the line of Max's attention to a thin, recessed seam in the ceiling. You smell something? Max gave a low, barely audible whine. Not fear, not confusion. Urgency. Connor found the looped cord folded into the molding and gave it a tug. The ladder released with a slow creak, dropping into place. Dust rained down in thin sheets, disturbed for the first time in what should have been decades. But the dust wasn't deep, and the metal hinges weren't frozen. They moved too easily. Max remained still, but his eyes never left the opening. Connor climbed slowly, flashlight tucked against his shoulder, the wooden rungs soft beneath his weight. The moment he poked his head into the attic, a new kind of silence met him, thicker, compressed. The beam of light swept the rafters. The space was wide but low-ceilinged, filled with insulation slumped into corners. Cardboard boxes, some sealed, others half collapsed, sat stacked against the walls. A musty mattress pad lay crumpled in the middle, surrounded by a small ring of cigarette butts and empty thermos caps. Connor shifted his weight and crouched. He reached down, fingers brushing one of the cigarettes. The ash was dry, but not brittle. Still warm. He froze. Someone had been up here within the last 24 hours. Behind him, Max waited below. Quiet but present. Connor glanced back at the attic opening and then pressed forward, scanning carefully. In the far corner, partially hidden beneath a ripped canvas tarp, hung a wool coat, thick, charcoal grey, the kind worn in winter only by men who'd never had to swing a hammer. Dust clung to it in patches, but the shoulders had been recently disturbed. He reached up and pulled it free from the beam. It was heavier than expected. A hard bulge in one pocket clinked softly as it moved. Inside the collar were stitched initials. M.H. Connor stared at the letters, heart slamming against his ribs. M.H. Martin Holt, Mayor of Grayson County. The same man who, just months ago, had sworn under oath that this property had been abandoned for 40 years. Connor stood frozen, the jacket hanging from his hand. Every part of him went still except his breath, which came shorter now, colder. Why would the mayor be living in the attic of a property he claimed didn't exist? He checked the inside pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a diner receipt from 2 towns over, dated just 6 days ago. Connor backed toward the attic hatch and dropped the coat down first. Max sniffed it immediately, then let out a low growl, deep, slow, deliberate. Recognition. Connor climbed down quickly, shutting the hatch with a snap, then stepped aside. Max paced once, nose to the jacket, then sat squarely beside it, tail straight behind him, his eyes locked on Connor. "You've smelled him before, haven't you?" Max didn't move. His stillness was answer enough. Connor crouched beside the dog and laid a hand on the thick fur of his neck. Mayor Holt hadn't just visited the house. He had been living in it, watching, hiding, maybe protecting something buried even deeper than the files they'd already found. Connor looked around the upstairs hallway. Nothing else seemed out of place. But now every sound, the shifting wood, the wind through the windows, even his own breath, felt like it might be observed. He picked up the jacket again. The weight of it had changed. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was evidence. And it reeked of betrayal. Back downstairs, he laid the coat across the hearth. Max lay beside it, body curled tightly, head resting on his paws but eyes wide open. Connor sat at the edge of the couch, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. He could feel it now, how the house held on to secrets. Not just the ones hidden in files, but the kind people chose to bury in insulation and lies. The mayor had come here to disappear. But Max had found his scent, and Connor had found his jacket. There would be no more hiding, not in this house, not from this dog, not anymore. The folder felt heavier with every step. Connor walked through the double glass doors of the Grayson County Annex, the same place where he'd bought the house for 50 cents just weeks ago. Only this time, his posture had changed. He wasn't just a man looking for a fresh start. He was a man holding proof. Max walked beside him, leash loose, but unnecessary. The German shepherd's head was high, eyes constantly scanning. He could feel the tension, even if he didn't understand the specifics. and Connor trusted Max's instincts more than anyone else's. At the counter, the same clerk from the auction sat behind a monitor. Her name tag read Teresa. She looked up, recognized him, and instantly stiffened. "I need to speak to someone about a set of property records," Connor said. "It's urgent." Teresa hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but what I have shouldn't wait." He slid the folder across the counter. She didn't touch it. Connor leaned in, voice low. "It includes forged deeds. Names of families pushed off their land. Signatures from officials who no longer live here. And evidence the mayor has been living inside a house he publicly declared condemned." Teresa's face paled. She looked around, as if someone might be watching. Then she gently pushed the folder back toward him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," she said. "This isn't something we can process at the desk. You'll need to go through the county attorney's office. Then give me their contact." She hesitated again, lowering her voice. "They're not going to help you." "I'm sorry," Max growled once, just a low vibration that sent a ripple through the room. Connor picked up the folder. "Thanks for nothing." They left in silence, the echo of Max's nails sharp on the tile floor. Outside, the sun was bright, but the town felt darker. Connor noticed how people turned away when they passed. The same old man who had tipped his hat when they moved in now shuffled across the street without a glance. The waitress from the corner diner ducked behind a curtain when she spotted them. They drove to the bank next. Connor parked in front of the Grayson Community Trust and stared at the building. It was clean, friendly-looking, the kind of small-town bank that sent out Christmas cards and calendars. Max hopped out, standing tall at his side. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and fluorescent lighting. A young man in a navy suit stepped forward, smiling until he saw Connor's expression. "And the dog." "Sir, pets aren't—" "He's not a pet," Connor said. "He's military. He stays." The man hesitated, then gestured toward an open office. Connor sat. Max lay by the door, head resting on his front paws but eyes fixed on everything. "I got a letter," Connor began, sliding it across the desk. "Says I owe $2,000 in additional processing fees on the property I bought outright. Says I've got 30 days before foreclosure proceedings start." The banker read it, lips pressing thin. "This is standard procedure for special filings," he said. "What's special about mine?" No answer. Connor leaned forward. "I know Holt's been using that house. I have his jacket. I have files from a vault hidden in the floor. Do you think this is going away with a fee?" The banker folded the letter, slid it back, and said quietly, "You have 28 days now." Connor stood. "You tell whoever told you to send that letter they should have picked someone easier to scare." Back at the truck, Connor didn't speak. He just sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering column like it might offer a way out. Max rested his head on Connor's thigh. Connor looked down, ran a hand along the dog's shoulder. "We're not wrong." That's why they're pushing back. The mailbox at the house held another envelope, this one with no return address. Inside was a single typed sentence on unmarked paper. "You should have stayed quiet." Connor read it twice. Max stood in the doorway, eyes locked on him. He dropped the paper on the table and sat beside the dog. The whole town's in on it, or afraid to fight it. Maybe both. Max let out a low breath through his nose and laid his head on Connor's boot. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside, a different kind of pressure was building. The kind that comes when the world stops pretending. It's still civil. Connor looked around the stone house, the one that was supposed to be a reset, a refuge. It was becoming something else now, a line in the sand. He opened the file again, this time carefully organizing the most damning documents into a new stack. Then he placed them in a lockbox and slid it under the floorboards in the hallway. Max watched every move, tail flicking once when the panel clicked back into place. Connor whispered, "They want to bleed us out." "Make us leave." Max looked up, eyes steady, unwavering. "They're going to learn something real fast." Connor added, "About what happens when you push a soldier and his dog too far." That night, Max sat at the window, unmoving. And in the dark, when no one was supposed to be out, Connor saw the headlights. They passed slow, too slow, but they didn't stop. Not yet. It started with the flicker of the stove. Connor had just finished stacking more files into the steel lockbox when the faint scent hit his nose. Not strong, just enough to raise the hairs on his arms. He paused mid-step. Max lifted his head from the rug and inhaled sharply. His ears twitched. Then, without hesitation, he stood and moved straight toward the kitchen, tail low, posture tight. Connor followed. He didn't say a word. Max padded across the tile, stopped near the old gas range, and barked once, short and urgent. Connor knelt and leaned closer to the pilot line. The smell was stronger now. Acrid. Artificial. He reached for the valve beneath the range and twisted it shut. The hissing stopped. He stood slowly. Max was still beside him, nose pressed towards the floor, jaw tight. He looked up, eyes locked on Connor's face. Connor didn't need a second opinion. He grabbed a box of baking soda from the cupboard, opened all the windows in the kitchen, and moved to the hallway to switch off the breaker panel. Outside, the winter air sliced through the house as he let it clear. He stood on the porch, hand resting on the railing, staring out across the empty field. They'd cut the gas line. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't weather. First, the power had gone out. Twice, after he'd filed a report. Then the foreclosure letter. Then the note in the mailbox. And now this. Not subtle anymore, Connor said under his breath. Max stepped up beside him and stared out into the dark. His ears twitched, nose testing the air like radar. Connor turned and looked back at the house. The windows flickered with soft lamplight now, but something had shifted. The place no longer felt abandoned or haunted. It felt hunted. He paced the perimeter of the house with a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other. Max followed, occasionally darting ahead, pausing near the meter box on the side wall. Connor crouched. The gas line had been tampered with, cut cleanly, not cracked or corroded. Someone had used a blade, then left it open, just enough to let the scent build slowly. It would have filled the house by morning, and then all it would have taken was one spark. Connor stood, jaw clenched. Max circled once and sat at his side, gaze locked on the tree line at the edge of the yard. They watched for movement. There was none. Back inside, the air had cleared, but the tension hadn't. Connor checked the windows, each latch intact, and set up a rotation between rooms. He moved the sleeping bag closer to the hallway, placed the lockbox beneath the floor panel again, and loaded a fresh magazine into his sidearm. Max lay near the hearth, eyes open, ears twitching at every creak. Connor sat with his back against the wall, rifle propped against his knee. His hands weren't shaking, but they weren't steady either. "They're done playing games," he said, voice quiet but sharp. Max lifted his head. "I don't know how far they'll go. But I do know this. They underestimated you." The dog let out a soft, gruff sound. A sound Connor had come to recognize as approval, or maybe agreement. Hours passed. The wind picked up, brushing against the shutters like fingertips. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried out. But closer, too close, something shifted. Max stood. Connor followed the dog's line of sight to the far window. Just a silhouette in the glass, nothing moving. But Max's stance said otherwise. He moved to the door and waited. Connor stepped into the hallway. There, just beneath the threshold, a shadow moved quickly past the window. He spun to follow, but it vanished into the dark. Max didn't bark. He didn't need to. His body language said it all. Intrusion. Intent. Whoever it was had come close enough to see inside, close enough to check for light, close enough to smell whether the gas had done its job. But they were gone now. Connor sat again, this time slower. He looked around the room. His fingers brushed the edge of the 50-cent coin that still lay on the mantel, where he'd placed it that first night as a joke. It didn't feel funny anymore. He looked at Max. "You saved my life again tonight." The dog didn't blink. Connor let the words settle. Then he said, quieter this time, "No more waiting. No more hiding." He stood and pulled out a fresh notepad. If the town wouldn't listen, he'd take the story elsewhere. But he wasn't running. Max lay back down, tail curling tight around his body, but his eyes never closed. That night, for the first time, Connor didn't fall asleep from exhaustion. He stayed awake on purpose, listening to every shift in the wind and every breath from the dog at his side. Because now he knew. They weren't just trying to scare him, they were trying to erase him. Quietly. But Max had heard them coming, and that would be their mistake. It was almost dawn when Max started pawing at the west wall. Connor had been organizing the files again, each name, deed, and signature catalogued in rows on the dining room table, when he heard the sound. Not frantic, not playful, precise. He looked over. Max stood by the far corner of the house, near a bookcase bolted into the wall. His claws scratched with intent, head low, ears pulled slightly back in that focused way Connor had come to respect. When Max moved like that, it wasn't habit. It was history. Connor stood, flashlight in hand, and approached slowly. "You've got something, don't you?" Max didn't respond, just pressed one paw flat against the baseboard and stared at the wall. Connor tapped his knuckles against the plaster. The sound was off, thicker than the rest of the room. He swept the light over the wall. The paint looked newer, smoother, even, too even. He dropped to one knee and pressed his palm to the wood floor. There, a faint draft. Cool air leaking through the crack between the wall and the molding. Connor pried at the baseboard. The panel shifted slightly, just enough to show what had been covered. A false wall, and behind it, a steel door embedded into the stone. He sat back on his heels. "You've got to be kidding me." Max's tail swished once. No bark, just that steady, alert silence. Connor brushed dust off the surface. The steel was matte black, reinforced, and sealed with an old combination lock. Scratched numbers encircled the dial, worn down from use. There was no nameplate, no label. Just silence. Connor retrieved his toolkit from the truck and came back with bolt cutters, gloves, and a crowbar. It took him nearly an hour to pry through the rusted hinges and lock system. Max waited, lying near the door with his eyes fixed on the hallway, guarding the space like a soldier on perimeter duty. Finally, with a heavy groan, the door gave. Connor stood back and let the light spill into the hidden room. Dust danced through the beam. Air heavy with the scent of mildew, old ink, metal, and something else. Money. Stacks of it. Floor to ceiling, the space was lined with industrial shelving. On one wall, green file boxes with military stencils. On the other, bundles of cash wrapped in aging bands, each marked with faded agency tags. And in the center, 3 black cases, padlocked, labeled with 6-digit account numbers. Max stepped forward and stopped just short of the threshold. His breathing slowed. He looked up at Connor and then back into the room. Connor whispered, "Vault." He walked in slowly. The first file box he opened was labeled DOD Grant Allocations, K9 Division. Inside were reimbursement forms, travel logs, and handler injury claims, all stamped and processed. At least half had forged signatures. He flipped deeper into the stack. The numbers didn't make sense. Massive sums approved for tiny programs. Outdated clinics listed as receiving new grants. Whole districts signed off by people who hadn't worked in government for years. He opened the second box. Veteran housing credits, rejected files, letters, denials, reapplications. Every file connected to someone who had either disappeared, lost land, or, he recognized the pattern, had once owned one of the deeds in his earlier folder. He moved to the black case in the center. It took minutes to force it open. Inside were bearer bonds, trust documents, and what looked like corporate stock options, neatly registered under LLCS that didn't show up in any state business directory. Total value? Hard to say, but easily over $2 million on face alone. Connor stood there, surrounded by enough proof to unravel a career, a legacy, a town. Max walked in now, slow and deliberate. He sniffed once at the lowest shelf, then again, deeper. He stopped at a wooden crate and gave a short, sharp bark. Connor opened it. Inside was a metal canister. On its side, stamped with an old federal seal, and the words Restricted K-9 Medical Supply Fund, Fiscal 2009. Connor's hands shook. He remembered this. That year, his father's name had come up in military circles as someone pushing back on cuts to K-9 support programs, claims denied, units dismantled, handlers left without medical coverage for dogs who had taken bullets for them. This wasn't just corruption. It was theft from the dogs who served. Connor looked down at Max. The shepherd met his eyes. "You knew," he said. "You knew it wasn't just about property." Max didn't blink. They left the vault exactly as they found it, sealing the door again from the inside. Connor didn't trust any lock. He'd hide what he could, copy the rest, and deliver it where it had to go. That night, back in the kitchen, the files were spread across the table again. But this time, there was no shaking in his hands. Connor poured water into Max's bowl and set it beside him. "I don't know how we're going to get this out," he said quietly. "But I know one thing." He looked at the dog, at the scar on his leg from a wound that should have ended his working days. "They stole from you. From dogs like you. From the handlers who never came home." Max drank, then sat, pressing his side gently into Connor's leg. There were sounds outside again that night, but neither of them moved from the table. The truth was too big now, and the vault was just the beginning. Connor had to drive 2 towns over to meet Ray Molina. Grayson was too tight, too wired, too full of eyes pretending not to see. Ray had agreed to the meeting with hesitation in his voice. He'd been a war correspondent once, embedded with units in Iraq and Syria, before he came back and started writing about quieter wars, corruption, land theft, fraud in sleepy counties like this one. He'd walked away from journalism 5 years ago after his source in a federal land dispute disappeared. Officially, it was a suicide. Connor parked in a worn lot beside an old feed supply store. Max sat upright in the passenger seat, watching the entrance like a sentry. "Easy," Connor said. "We're just talking." Ray arrived 10 minutes late. Grey hoodie, ball cap low. He looked like someone trying hard not to be noticed, but still moved like a man who'd seen too much. He nodded once at Connor and barely glanced at the dog. "You're serious about this?" Ray asked. Connor didn't answer. He handed over a flash drive, copies of everything they'd pulled from the hidden vault. Ray plugged it into his tablet and scrolled through the files in silence. Max didn't take his eyes off him the entire time. "Where'd you get all this?" Ray asked finally. Connor shrugged. "Bought a house for 50 cents. Ray let out a quiet breath. "This is federal. At least half of it touches the Department of Defense. You've got ghost non-profits, redirected funds, fake K9 clinics, names I haven't seen since the last whistleblower went dark. I need it out in the open, Connor said. I don't care if it's a blog or a courtroom. Ray closed the tablet, slipping it into his bag. This doesn't go public until I verify it. You understand? Otherwise it vanishes like the rest. Connor nodded. You won't get a second chance. This is it. They walked toward their cars. That's when Max started barking. Not his usual alert. This was full-throated, ears forward, tail stiff barking, the kind that came with a snarl behind it. He leapt down from the truck bed and stood between Connor and the road. A black SUV rounded the corner too slowly. Connor grabbed Ray's arm. Get in. Now they jumped into the truck. Connor threw it into reverse and backed out onto the street, tires squealing. The SUV followed. No plates, windows tinted. Max spun in the back, bracing himself. He let out another bark that cut through the engine noise. They followed you, Ray said. No. Connor growled. They followed the story. The SUV gained on them. Connor took a hard right onto a dirt road lined with trees. Max shifted his weight, keeping balance as the truck jolted. They're not trying to stop us, Connor said. They're herding us. Why? Ray asked, panic seeping into his voice. Connor's jaw clenched. Because they don't want the evidence. They want to make an example. The road narrowed. Connor could see the tree line thinning, but up ahead, the road dead-ended at a dried-up creek bed. He slammed the brakes. The SUV screeched to a halt behind them. Two men stepped out, one with a baton, the other with something heavier. Connor reached for the glove box, yanked out the pistol. You run, he told Ray. Max and I will hold them. No, Ray said, frozen. I can't leave. Max didn't wait. The shepherd launched out of the truck like a missile, intercepting the first man mid-step. The baton dropped with a thud. The second man raised his weapon, but Connor fired once, hitting the ground near his feet. Enough to send him diving behind the SUV. Max had the first guy on the ground, but the second circled around fast, catching Max with the edge of his boot as he charged. The dog let out a sharp yelp, but didn't let go. His jaws were clamped, his body low, braced, trained. Connor ran, covering the distance in seconds. He tackled the second attacker, slamming him hard into the side of the truck. The man dropped. Ray grabbed the baton and held it like he remembered training from another life. Max stumbled back, blood seeping from a gash along his ribs. Connor dropped beside him. No, no, no. You stay with me. Max collapsed onto his side, breathing shallow, eyes glassy but still locked on Connor. Ray was already on the phone, shouting for a vet clinic, a number, anything. Connor pressed both hands against Max's wound. You did good. You hear me? You did more than anyone ever asked. Max gave the faintest wag of his tail. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the shot. Connor whispered, You didn't hesitate. Not for a second, Ray helped lift Max into the truck bed. Connor drove, one hand on the wheel, one on Max's side, voice low and steady. You stay with me. You're not done yet. At the emergency clinic, everything blurred, white lights, hurried hands, clipped orders. Connor wasn't allowed to stay with Max during the surgery. He sat in the hallway with blood on his jeans and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Ray returned from the parking lot. The flash drive's gone. They took it. Connor didn't flinch. I've got copies, he said. Ray blinked. What? Connor looked up, his voice hard. They were never going to get the only copy. I mailed 2 out yesterday. One to a lawyer in Denver, one to a reporter in D.C. Ray let out a long breath. Then this isn't over. No, Connor said. Now it started. The vet stepped into the hallway, gloves stained, eyes tired. He's stable. The next few hours are critical. Connor nodded once. He's strong. The vet smiled faintly. So are you. Later that night, Connor sat beside Max's cage. The dog was hooked to fluids, a bandage wrapped tight around his midsection. You didn't protect just me, Connor whispered. You protected the story. The truth Max blinked slowly, then rested his head against the side of the cage. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything a dog doesn't need to say. Connor didn't remember getting to the vet, just the cold rush of air as he carried Max, soaked in blood, through the front doors. The staff moved fast, no questions asked, as if they could see the urgency in Connor's eyes and the dog's barely rising chest. Max was rushed to the back, leaving Connor in the waiting room with his arms empty and red. He stood there for a long time, not sitting, not blinking, just waiting. When Ray finally arrived, his face said everything. They know, he said, handing Connor a burner phone. DC called me. The copies you sent. One's already on a desk at the Capitol. Connor didn't react. His eyes were still on the hallway, where Max had vanished behind swinging doors. You okay? Ray asked. Connor finally looked at him. He saved your life. I had a choice, and he didn't wait for me to make it. Ray nodded slowly. He didn't hesitate. No, he never has. Connor moved to the corner of the waiting room, pulled out his laptop, and connected to the clinic's Wi-Fi. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. I don't care who wants to bury this, he said. They don't get to have the last word. He uploaded everything. The files, the videos from the vault, the list of shell corporations, the forged invoices that traced back to government grants meant for veteran K9S. Everything. He attached a statement, short and sharp. This story nearly died with a dog who never asked for a thing. Do the right thing. Let it live. He hit send. Within hours, the files were on every major news site. Reddit threads exploded. Hashtag spread. Hashtag justice for Max. Hashtag K9 funds scam. Hashtag dog of valor. National outlets picked it up. The story led the evening news. Anchors spoke with urgency, flashing between grainy footage of Max lunging at an attacker and the pristine logos of the organizations that had siphoned millions meant for military and police working dogs. Photos of Max circulated. The shot of him beside Connor at the truck, the one from his deployment in uniform, and finally, the image snapped in the hospital, unconscious but wrapped in white gauze, breathing through a mask. The country didn't just watch, it roared. Protests erupted in front of local town halls. K9 handlers, police officers, and veterans posted tributes online. People sent donations to the clinic where Max was being treated. A group of former military dog handlers offered to take shifts at the clinic to help with security, just in case. And then came the twist no one expected. Mayor Holt disappeared. Gone overnight. His office stripped clean. Surveillance footage showed him walking out the back entrance of City Hall just before the news broke, carrying nothing but a briefcase. His car was found 2 states away, abandoned near a private airstrip. The FBI issued a statement confirming a federal investigation into misuse of government funds, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. They mentioned Connor by name. And Max. At the vet, Connor sat beside Max's recovery crate. The dog had made it through surgery, but barely. Tubes fed him oxygen and fluids. A heart monitor beeped in rhythm with the breaths he fought for. You did more than your job, Connor whispered. You gave people something to believe in. He held Max's paw, careful not to disturb the IV line. Max didn't stir, but his ears twitched when Connor spoke. He was still in there, still listening. A nurse entered the room. You've got visitors. Connor stood, expecting Ray. Instead, 2 men in suits entered, flashing federal badges. The taller one spoke. Mr. Hayes, we need your full testimony. This is going up the chain fast. Real fast, Connor nodded. After I know he's safe." They looked at Max through the glass. One of them said, "We've worked cases for 15 years. I've never seen a dog take a hit like that and survive." Connor answered without turning, "That's because you've never met Max." Later that night, a letter arrived at the clinic. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. They went after your dog because they knew you wouldn't break. But they forgot. He wouldn't either. Connor folded the note and slipped it into his jacket. He turned back to Max. "No more secrets," he whispered. "Not from me. Not from them. We let it all burn." Max stirred in his sleep. Just a little. But it was enough. He was still fighting. And this time, the whole country was fighting with him. The house didn't creak anymore. It breathed. In the early light of morning, mist rolled through the pines that flanked the old stone mansion. The air smelled of pine sap and wet earth, the kind of smell that clings to memory. Birds stirred in the trees. Somewhere down the slope, a brook hummed. But inside the house, inside those thick, time-worn walls, there was life again. Connor stood by the front door, a folder of legal papers in one hand, the other resting on Max's neck. The dog sat beside him, patched, bandaged, slower than before, but very much alive. His ears perked up as a knock echoed through the entryway. Connor opened the door to find a woman in her 50s holding a worn envelope. "I wasn't sure where else to bring this," she said. "But after what you did, after what he did—" She glanced at Max, then handed the envelope over. Inside were yellowed documents, names, accounts, and a photo of a young soldier with a K9 partner, the woman's brother, killed in action, forgotten by the system that had promised to honor him. "You stood up for your dog," she said. "Maybe now it's time someone stands up for ours." By noon, more came. A man in overalls with a binder of medical records, a retired handler with grainy footage from an old training camp, a teenager whose dad had been pushed out of the department for questioning grant money. They came not for revenge, not even for justice. They came because they believed the silence was over. The house that had once hidden secrets now welcomed confessions. Each story dropped like a pebble into still water, sending ripples through the memory of a town that had forgotten how to speak the truth. Ray leaned against the porch railing, watching the cars line up along the gravel road. "You turned this place into something else," he said. Connor shook his head. Max did. Inside, Max lay near the fireplace, his head resting on his paws. The fire crackled low. He looked up every time the door opened, tail thumping lightly, welcoming strangers like they were old friends. "He's going to be all right?" Ray asked. Connor nodded. "The vet says he's stubborn." That helps, Ray chuckled. "Sounds familiar." Later that evening, Connor found himself in the study, vault door now wide open, nothing left to hide. He sat on the leather armchair, Max at his feet. The dog shifted, pressed closer. Connor reached down, fingers tracing the soft fur just behind Max's ear. "We didn't just find a vault, boy," he whispered. "We found the truth." Max's tail swept the floor once, then again. A soft bark broke the quiet. Outside, someone rang the bell again. The house had stopped being quiet because quiet was the enemy. Secrets had lived in its walls for too long. Now it was filled with voices, with footsteps, with people choosing to speak. Connor rose and opened the front door once more. A child stood there, clutching a weathered plush German shepherd. "My granddad said his real dog looked just like yours," she said. "He said they were heroes." Connor smiled. He was right. She looked past him at Max, who lifted his head. She waved. The dog gave a quiet chuff, as if acknowledging an old truth being passed down. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the yard, Connor stood with Max under the porch light. He turned to the camera someone from the local news had set up earlier in the day, still blinking red, still recording. If this story found its way to you, maybe it's because somewhere in your life there was a dog that saw you when no one else did, that stood when you couldn't, that didn't care about titles or lies or power, just about loyalty. He glanced down. And if Max's story meant something to you, don't let it end here. Speak up. Share it. Let people know that truth has teeth. And sometimes a tail too. Max barked once. Strong, clear, proud. And the house didn't stay quiet after that. It never would again. If you believe dogs like Max deserve more than silence, help us keep stories like his alive. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories, where loyalty barks louder than fear.